and your great congressman together, it was actually collegial. They seemed to actually like each other. They didn't demonize each other. They'd been together, members of the Congress. In 5 minutes, they didn't actually assault one another. Wow, it was very heartwarming. I don't know what to say. I'm kind of speechless on this. Maybe this contagion will spread with a new president, where we actually start solving problems rather than saying how bad the other side is. Before we begin, I thought it would be appropriate just for a moment of silence for the Marines that lost their lives in the recruiting office in Chattanooga, if you don't mind. Thanks. Thank you very much. We're living in times that are quite perilous. We have these new threats that are serious. We have Islamic terrorism that we used to think is just isolated in one part of the world and we could pull back. It didn't matter. That was somebody else's business. Now we see the impacts of what happens when we pull back. These threats spread over the internet all around the world, including our own country. And I, for one, believe that we need to re-engage with the rest of the world, fight barbaric Islamic terrorism in the Middle East, and also do what we need to do to protect the homeland, using all the tools available to make it so, protecting civil liberties along the way, but make sure that we keep this country safe. I also think, just watching this unfold, I asked Senator Heller about this. A law was passed apparently in the Clinton administration about whether in recruiting offices, whether Marines or others, military should be able to have guns, and apparently it's prohibited. I think it ought to be allowed. Not just amongst the military, of course, but civilians that are armed in the right way. In Florida, we have 1.2 million concealed weapons permits, more than any state, almost by double. And our crime rates are dropping each and every year for the last 30 years, and gun violence has dropped as well. Law-abiding citizens that have the right of self-defense creates a safer place as well. Just as an aside. So, here's why I wake up each day with incredible enthusiasm for the mission I'm on, and for a belief that this is the most awesome experience for a person. I'm humbled by the chance to be able to go spread my belief that this is the greatest time to be alive in this world. We're on the verge of something that has never happened in world history that I'm aware of. We're on the verge of a nation that is teetering towards decline, and only in America could we fix a few really big complex things to get us back in our ascendancy again. Only in America could we renew ourselves, where we could grow and prosper, where our children and our grandchildren would have more opportunities than what we've had. It seems to me that has been the definition of the greatness of this country. One generation after the other has been able to pass the baton off, not always perfect. There's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We've had great challenges in our country, but we've resolved to fix them and we've moved forward. Inevitably, our children have had more chances to pursue their dreams, completely different than ours, perhaps, in a way that allows them to do the same for their children. That's what we need to restore. And I believe we're on the verge of greatness again. I believe if we fix how we tax, we have the most convoluted tax code in the world. It suppresses job growth. It makes it harder for businesses to be able to provide the kind of high-wage jobs that the great middle of our country, the great middle class of our country needs. 5 million more people are stuck in poverty, in spite of the fact that we've spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars of new money to take care of people in poverty. 5 million more people are in poverty since the day Barack Obama got elected. Workforce participation rates today are lower than they were in 1978. 6.5 million people are working part-time and they want to work full-time. I made this comment in an editorial board meeting in the Manchester Union Leader, and Hillary Clinton tried to take my head off. Well, how does she respond to the fact that it's the progressive agenda of more taxes, more regulation, not fixing the things that makes it harder for people to rise up? Obamacare creates a policy that provides incentives for people to work 29 hours, not 40 hours. Every rule that's passed makes it harder for people to get the kind of income they need. My vision of what America should look like is that we have rising income for the middle, that we have a society where people, irrespective of where they start in life, have a right to rise up and a chance to rise up to achieve earned success, and that our prosperity together moves us forward, which means we have to revamp how we tax and certainly how we regulate. Yesterday I was in San Francisco. I don't know why this garnered a lot of attention. You may have seen it on TV. I took a Uber car. I do it all the time. It's not like the biggest deal in the world. I know in Nevada it's probably a big deal too. Eventually you'll get over it. Resisting these kind of changes in the better approach for people to be able to, to work. I'll tell you a story. I was in Los Angeles 3 months ago, and we had an Uber driver, kid, long hair, probably wasn't on our team at least yet. Wait till the progressives, create so many rules that he'll realize that he's more conservative than I think he believes he is today. And so I said, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm a senior at UCLA. I'm a chemistry major, and I do this job to be able to provide for my education. I'm saving my money because I just got into UCLA's medical school, and my aspiration is to become a doctor to take care of the sick and infirm and do it debt-free. And Uber gave him the chance to do that. The progressives, though, think, well, this is a horrible thing because, gosh, it has to be sorted out from up above. You have to get in line to do things. You can't do it the way you want to do it. Maybe you want to, be able to have 2 shared economy jobs. Every time they come up with rules to try to make it harder for people to rise up, dreams are shattered. If we're going to grow at 4% to make sure everybody has a chance to rise up, we need to fix these big, complex things. We need to embrace our energy revolution instead of trying to turn it back. This president should be ahead of a marching band celebrating the greatest success of American innovation, hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, creating an explosion of low-cost natural gas with less carbon emissions, creating high-wage jobs, the potential to industrialize our country, giving most Americans the best pay raise they've got, which is lower utility costs and lower gasoline prices. But every step along the way, the progressive liberal agenda is to make it harder for that to happen, to stymie that production, to make it harder for us to rise up again. If we can fix these things, we're on the verge of the greatest time to be alive. And you know what? I know that because I got to be governor of the crazy, wacky state called Florida. Florida's a lot like your state, very much so. A lot of people moving in, some people moving out. We have 500,000 more Democrats than Republicans. It's about as purple gets. It's certainly not as blue as California. It's not as red as Texas. But it's a state where a lot of things happen because it's a big, teeming state with a focus on the future. I got elected saying that I was going to be a reform-minded conservative. So I cut taxes every year, totaling $19 billion. The objective was to make personal income grow faster than government income. So every time I submitted a budget, it was based on what we assumed the projected personal income rate would be, and our government budget would be less. We challenged how our budgeting process worked. We had reserves every year. We went from $1 billion in reserves the day I got in, and I thanked my predecessor for allowing that to happen. And when I left, I gave my successor a $9 billion set of reserves. We did go from AA to AAA. A state without a big broad-based tax code is hard to get to AAA, but we did it because we put fiscal restraints on every aspect of how we went about our business. We didn't raid the pension fund like we're doing today with Social Security. We required the employer contribution to be fully funded. They called me Vito Corleone. At first I thought, why are they insulting me? Then I realized, man, that's a compliment. 2,500 separate line items in the budget that were cut, $2 billion. It brought discipline. To the net effect was we did become AAA bond rating, 13,000 fewer government workers, about 11% of the government workforce. In Florida now you can fire someone for incompetence. I know that's some of these things sound so funny. I mean, it's like people applaud that you can fire someone for incompetence. Well, Maybe we should bring that kind of philosophy to Washington, D.C. As I've watched the scandals and the sheer incompetence unfold of this administration, I think about my time as governor. When we had problems, and trust me, we did. We had a missing child in our child welfare system that broke my heart. It was a total breakdown of the system. We had a procurement that didn't go right. I had a couple of department heads during my 8 years that they violated their commitment to service. And every time that happened, rather than saying the dog ate my homework or it was somebody else's fault, I mean, imagine the Office of Personnel Management in Washington, D.C., the HR office of this massive federal government. The woman who finally resigned, I mean, it was just time for her to resign, but the woman said in a Senate testimony, might have been in your committee, said something to the effect, well, it's no one's to blame, it's the Chinese that are to blame. Well, really? No one's to blame for the Chinese government now having 21.5 million files, including the security clearance files? By the way, just as an adjunct to this, something I didn't know, in Washington, D.C., to get a security clearance, the form now takes 100 pages. Only in Washington could you require 100 pages. They know who your neighbors are. They know all your acquaintances overseas. They know all these things to be able to provide a security clearance, and apparently the Chinese now know it. That person should have been fired for day one prior to this, because the Inspector General of that same department in advance notice said that our security was so bad that this was going to happen. Yeah. Across the board of government, you need to accept personal responsibility as a leader and then fix it. And that's what I did as governor of Florida, and that's what we need in Washington, D.C. And I did things as well outside of the economy to create the 1.3 million jobs that were created by private business. We led the nation in small business growth, but we also did other things. I got an A+ rating for the NRA, consistently supporting the Second Amendment rights, and I'm proud of that. I'm a Catholic and I'm informed by my faith, and I believe I've actually never been applauded for being a Catholic. Thank you so much. But my faith informs a lot of what I believe, and I believe that life is precious. It's given to us from God, and it should be focused. You should commit in a loving way. You should promote a culture of life from beginning to end. I just believe that, and I tried to do that in public life. And when I saw an education system that was broken beyond repair, I fixed it. We were 50th out of 50 in graduation rates in Florida in 1998. You know, normally when you're like 49 or 47, you can always say, thank God for, you can wish for some state that's below you. In our case, there was no other place, so we were it. Everybody else in the country was saying, thank God for Florida. And we challenged everything. We grade schools in Florida based on what I said I was going to do as a candidate and then implementing it. A, B, C, D, and F. Everybody knows F is not as good as A. All based on student learning. Half on proficiency, half on learning gains. We created the most ambitious school choice programs, and I applaud, by the way, your legislature and your governor for signing the ESA law, which is going to make a huge difference. We created the first statewide voucher program. In Florida, kids with learning disabilities their parents can take dollar for dollar the state and local monies and go to a private school, irrespective of what the bureaucracy says. We have the largest corporate tax scholarship program. We're here in a charter school. We saw the tripling of charter schools and the number of students going to something like 225,000. The net result is robust accountability, high standards, school choice, created a massive increase in learning. Florida's low-income Hispanic kids on the nation's report card, this thing called the NAEP test, do better than the California average. Hispanic kids in Florida are #1 in the country. Low-income kids on that same test are #1 or #2. Kids with learning disabilities are #1 or #2. We saw the greatest gains in our graduation rate, went from 50th to now about the national average. All I'm saying is if you have a zeal for reform, and you have the leadership skills to make it so, and you're willing to take on the entrenched interests, and trust me, I got tar marks on my forehead for this, taking on the teachers' unions and the bureaucracy and all the people that say it's not fair, that some kids can learn and some kids can't. Kids in poverty, somehow we can't treat them to the same expectations that kids that live in affluent families. That is pure crap. If we're going to focus on... If conservatives are going to win, we need to be on the side of everybody, not just those that have already made it. We need to be an advocate for the aspirational nature of our country. And that brings me to the Republican primary for a brief moment. There are people that are preying on people's legitimate fears and anger. And I understand why people are angry. Whether it's immigration and the lack of control of the border, or the incompetence of Washington, or the lack of job opportunities, people have a legitimate reason to be angry and to feel disaffected. I totally get that. What I don't get is why people aspiring to the greatest office in the land would try to prey on their fears and prey on their anger. That's what we shouldn't have. What we ought to do is say we can fix these things and aspire to a better life. And so I commit to myself and to everybody I talk to, I'm going to be that kind of candidate. I'm going to be the one that is more positive. Getting angrier is not going to solve how we control the border. Getting angrier is not going to make it possible for more jobs to be created in our country. Getting angrier is not going to do anything to keep us safe. And I believe we ought to be supporting candidates that have plans to fix the things that are broken. And I believe with my leadership skills, based on trial and error and a lot of experience in Florida, that I'm that person. The final thing I'll say is that to grow at 4% per year, which should be our aspiration as a nation so that people can be lifted out of poverty and the middle class can get a pay increase, more money in their pocket for the first time in 15 years, we're going to also have to restore America's leadership in the world. We're living in an extraordinarily perilous time, and there could be one act that would make it harder for economic activity in our own country to take place. This president, I believe, is the first president, perhaps since Jimmy Carter, or even worse, in the World War II, post-World War II era, that does not believe America's leadership in the world is a force for good, for peace, and for security. He may have good motives. I don't ascribe bad motives to people that disagree with me. That's just not my nature. But he's wrong. More importantly, he's wrong on this. As we pull back, voids are filled. History is replete of examples of this, and we're now living, once again, where history repeats itself. As we pull back in the Middle East, asymmetric threats of terror fill those voids. As we pull back in Europe and in Asia, nation states feeling more aggressive, like Russia and China, are imposing their will in their regions and in the world. We begin to negotiate with our enemies, and our friends wonder where we are. This notion that somehow that mullahs will go quietly into the night, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that controls most of the economy of Iran will just say, okay, I guess this was really wrong of us now that we've gotten our deal with the United States, is just foolish. It's naive. That is not how you change the world. American leadership is how you change the world, where our friends know that we have their back and our enemies fear us a bit. If you don't want to have the greatest fighting force, American military, be sent overseas as the world's policeman, then you should demand that we have American leadership in the world again. That is the way that you do it. Name a country in the world. This is a little easier today, this week, than it was last week, so I apologize, but I'm giving you a little test. Name a country in the world where our relationship is better today than it was the day that Barack Obama got elected and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. Iran, yeah, of course. I mean, they're celebrating in the streets of Tehran right now. They're excited about it. Cuba. I don't know. Maybe Burma. But if you look at Europe, they wonder where we are, because we said we were pivoting to Asia. You go to Asia and they say, where the heck is the pivot? You go to the Middle East and the Persian Gulf countries have no confidence anymore that the United States will provide a security umbrella for them. In fact, this action may create a proliferation of nuclear weapons created in those countries concerned about Iran. You look at Israel, and for the first time in a long while, there's a gap between Israel and the United States. All of this creates insecurity and instability, and restoring America's leadership to create a more peaceful and secure world will be essential for us to get back on track to grow our economy. That is what we need to do. One final thing before we open this up for questions, and I'm looking forward to that. I am humbled and excited about the journey that I'm on. I do believe we're on the verge of greatness. And what I pledge to myself each and every day is that I'm going to be the happy warrior. I'm going to do this in a way that tries to draw people towards our cause. I want to win. I don't want to make a point. I'm not here to put on my resume candidate for president or Republican nominee. I believe we can fix these things. And so I'm organizing my campaign from day one to win. Not to come in second, not to come in third. And the way you win is you draw people towards your cause. You don't push people away. You don't run a campaign of grievance where you're pushing people aside, where your form of conservative thought is slightly better than another person's conservative thought. The great majority of the people running for president on our side are capable, talented people. I respect them enormously. I'm not against them. I'm for fixing the things that I think we can fix to make our life better for most people. And so I'm going to run a campaign that from the beginning to the end goes campaigning in places Republicans haven't been seen in a while. I'm going to go campaign in the Latino communities in Spanish and say, join our cause. You're aspirational. You believe in the same values that we share. Join us to be able to transform our country. I'm going to go campaign in the black churches to talk about school choice, to empower parents to make choices for their own children, to make sure that they have a chance to rise up. I'm going to go campaign in the college campuses to say, how's this last 6.5 years worked out? Been a great little ride, hasn't it? How's that faded Obama poster looking while you're sitting in your parents' basement, unemployed? The simple fact is, high sustained economic growth will benefit young people more than any other group. We got to go campaign with heart and with conviction outside our comfort zones in places where they haven't heard a conservative message in a long while. And I pledge that I will do that. I will never abandon my conservative principles, but I'm going to go campaign with people that are conservative. They just don't know it yet. I had one more sentence before I closed. It seems anticlimactic now, but I'm going to give it anyway. In February, you all are going to be gathering up in this school as in the caucus here in Carson City, and I hope that you'll come back, and I hope you'll support me, because I think you're looking at the next president of the United States. And I'm going to let you go. I forgot to give the update on my dad. He's still in the ICU unit, but I was telling somebody, she got mad at me right here, you got a little mad at me, we know when my dad, he gets in the hospital kind of pretty regularly at 91, he's a little frail, but when he starts telling semi-dirty jokes to the nurses, we know that he's on the rebound, so I get this from my mother, so you know that it's not going to be, he's just the greatest man I know, and he's still hanging in. So we have microphones, or how are we doing this? There's a man right there that wants to lead us off. There's another microphone over there. Right behind you. That way you won't give a really long question. We've learned this as we've gone about our town hall meetings. Just for the record, by the way, you notice there's no screening of questions, there's no rope lines, there's Jen. As long as you keep it kind of PG and below, you can come, you can say whatever you want. We're happy to be here. This is part of running for president.
Well, thank you, Governor, for that. And actually, as a proud resident of Carson City, I also want to thank you so very much for coming. It means a lot to a lot of us. So thank you. My question for you is, I mean, we've seen in the last week how this administration has handled Iran and has come up with their version of a deal, as well as leaving 4 brave Americans behind, in my opinion. What will you do, or what would you have done differently than the president, and what would you do about our American hostages?
So what I would have done, first of all, I wouldn't have begun to negotiate with Iran. I don't know, I didn't. I'll concede something to you in retrospect. The president talking to enemies isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as you have a clear objective and you stick with it. So his objective was actually an objective that would have been a huge victory for peace and stability in the world, which was to never allow Iran to become a nuclear threshold country. That was his objective just 3 years ago. Line in the sand, kind of like the red line in Syria. And the line that said that Russia was just a regional power. This grandiosity of language and then never backing it up creates uncertainty across the world. In this particular case, it creates a huge problem for us. So we've gone from saying we're going to negotiate, keep the sanctions, make them tough, and they were tough and they were having an impact, where we're going to make sure that there was robust inspections and that there would not be the ability to have the centrifuges necessary to have a bomb. You could build a civilian capability if you wanted, but you could get the fuel just like many other countries that have nuclear power. You could get it inside the regime of, the international regime of how you regulate all this. So we start there, and every time there was an end of a phase of negotiation, it was extended and we unilaterally conceded. So now we end up with a situation dramatically different than where we started. Today, the sanctions will be lifted, most of them in relatively short order. We're talking about $150 billion, by the way, frozen assets, and then the ability to export oil now. We'll have the UN release their sanctions next week, in all likelihood, begin that process. So all of the great work that was done by the president's predecessor and by his administration to bring China and Russia along through the UN sanctions, they'll be gone. We're lifting the embargo on conventional weapons imports by Iran without anything in return. Iran continues to be the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. They're using these new resources. They won't say, well, now that we've gotten what we want, of course we'll pull back. They're not going to do that. They're going to aggressively pursue their agenda in the Sunni Arab states. And so you'll see, I think, increased activity in Iraq, in Syria, supporting the brutal Assad regime, supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Syria, supporting Hamas in the Gaza Strip, jeopardizing the security of Israel, continuing to fight and create chaos in Yemen, and maybe expanding it beyond that. This is the impact of lifting the sanctions. The verification part of this is so vague and confusing, and this is the place where I think the Senate has an important role to make sure the American people understand that there is very little clarity in this. I actually am going to read the agreement at some point if a regular person can, because I want to get a sense if in English you could actually understand what they've written about, because it's hard for me to envision how this verification process works. The anytime, any place, great language, again, the president came up with, now has been replaced by a system that we have to petition the Iranian government to come in, and there's a 24-hour period of some time, and then or 24-day period, excuse me, and then you go to a committee, and then look, if you have a restaurant here in Carson City that's like all messed up, and people are getting sick, I'm sure that doesn't happen. Some other city, Reno. I'll try to be politically correct. Fort Lauderdale, how about that? And you call the health inspector. Imagine the health inspector having to do the same level of the kind of inspections that we're asking the UN, IEA, whatever it's called, to do. 24 days. You don't think someone would clean up the restaurant if they had problems? Well, they're going to be able to clean up their mess. And so every aspect of this deal, I think, headed south. It legitimizes a regime that chance almost on a weekly basis, death to America, death to Israel, the weakness of this agreement. And I think the next president will have to rebuild the alliances, the relationships in the region to make sure that the rest of the Middle East understands that we're in it for the long haul, because if not, if we abandon our relationship, Iran will run wild, and there ought to be consideration for revoking the agreement over a period of time in concert with our allies. One thing that I won't do is to say, as a candidate, I'm going to tear up the agreement on the first day. Now that's great, that sounds great, but maybe you ought to check in with your allies first. Maybe you ought to appoint a Secretary of State. Maybe Secretary of Defense. You might want to have your team in place before you take an act like that. But moving back into a leadership position where we're pressuring Iran again to behave by international norms rather than thinking that naively they'll do it without any pressure at all has got to be the proper step. How about in the back? Anybody right back there? Step up, whoever wants to. She just did. I can't see the. There you go.
Somebody else? I defer to the lady.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you do? I'm so happy you are here.
Thank you. I'm happy you're here.
I want to tell you, I like everything you said about education. I am an education advocate, and I agree wholeheartedly. We can't put labels and call people, decide what kids are, but we really don't need Common Core. It's destroying the family. And I would like will you reconsider your position on Common Core?
Here's what I'm for. I'm for higher standards, state-driven. Yesterday, in Washington, D.C., the Senate passed the reauthorization of the K-12 law. In that law, a provision exists that says the federal government should not have any say in the creation of standards, content, or curriculum directly and I think indirectly, which is the proper thing to do, to put a cap on federal involvement in the creation of standards. Standards are expectations. The bigger issue is content and curriculum, which has got to be state and locally driven for sure. And if your state wants to get out of Common Core state standards, great. Just make sure the ones you replace them with are higher. You know what I'm saying? And assess them faithfully. And make sure that you have a system where there's a consequence around those standards and that assessment and that learning. So that if there's improvement, there's rewards. And if there's failure, you don't keep doing what you have been doing. The definition of insanity applies in public education in America today. So I'll give you an example of how we did it in Florida. In Florida, we do grade schools A through F. And in the beginning, if an F school was 2 out of 4 years, every parent would be given a voucher to go to a private school or a higher performing public school. And every school that was an A or showed improvement got $100 more per student directly, without the cut by the bureaucracy of the school district, directly to the school. We had tremendous gains in learning. It was state driven. That's what I'm for. The people that are saying, that Common Core standards are bad, fine. Just make sure that if you want to change the 44 states that are doing this, the commonality is not as important to me as the fact that the standards are higher than what existed before. Don't impose, but create higher standards that are developed that will make it possible for more children to learn. The shameful fact in America today, and it's shameful, and it's dangerous, frankly, about 40% of our kids are college or career ready. Think about that. We spend more per student than any country in the world other than, I got PolitiFacted, by the way, Pastor. I got PolitiFacted on this, and I said more per student than any country in the world, and they did a deep analysis of this, and there were 3 countries that spent more. Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and Belgium. I mean, they're a half of a Miami-Dade County. They're a half of a Vegas school district, in essence. But if you can create accountability around this, you get rising student achievement across the board. Why wouldn't we want to transform our system so that more than 40% of our kids are college or career ready? We have an 80% graduation rate, so how can it be? Well, They get a piece of paper that says they've graduated, but when they try to go to community college, or they try to get a job, they're told you got to retake high school English and high school math before you start taking college work. That is shameful. That's going to destroy the chance for a whole ton of people in the economy we're moving towards, where innovation and technology will drive whether jobs are created or not. Kids that can't read and write or calculate math are not going to be able to get a job. And I believe that that should be a national priority, not a federal program.
I hope I said this right. Chet, I watched you on TV and you wanted to be known by your sign.
The mic's not working.
My question is,
Hang on a sec. My name is John Ellis Bush, J-E-B. And I've been known that way since for 62 relatively short years.
yes, sir. My question is, based on technology, the growth of America, what I think it's done for America, how do you accept the program of NASA and getting us back in space?
Look, just as a great, love that question. Just as an aside, I think when we get pessimistic, as we are, and when we look inward because we're pessimistic, we miss opportunities. And I believe that our country does better when we're big and bold and aspirational. And moonshot moments, they exist all around us, and we should embrace those. And I think the space program is one of those inspirational programs that shouldn't be gutted as it's been gutted over the last few years. And just think the last 2 years, I guess, they had, I don't know if you follow space, did you follow this incredible engineering feat that was from the California lab where they landed a module on Mars? The ability to do this, no other country comes close to doing this. And while it's just a useful exercise, no, all of this stuff has direct applicability for our innovative capacity on the ground as well. I think we ought to do other things too, like explore the brain. How many people here? My mother-in-law has dementia. She's 94. I mean, she's diabetic. She's got dementia. She's a child of God. She's the most amazing woman I know. But I know so many people that have loved ones. They're the caregiver of someone who has dementia of some form. And 20 years from now, this is going to overwhelm us. And the tragedy of this is that we spend a lot less money on diseases related to the brain, mental illness, drug addictions, Alzheimer's, than we do for other things. And yet this is going to be a huge issue. Why don't we discover the brain while we're discovering the stars? These big things have huge implication. The problem right now is in America that most of the spending is in the here and now because we haven't fixed our entitlement system. We're not challenging how we spend. So research and development, infrastructure, the space program, long-term procurement programs for the military, all of which are really important, get crowded out by spending that is in the here and now. And it doesn't have the same productive benefits. So I believe that we should be finding these things and building consensus around them to lift our spirits a little bit. This great country can do so much if we're more hopeful and optimistic and respond to the world around us rather than thinking the end is near. We should be much more dynamic and embrace the unforeseen because that's what we've always done extraordinarily well.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I guess apparently I have no control of this.
I'm just going to be asking questions a little while ago, but first of all, I want to tell you that I like the fact that you come across as a competent executive. I really do. There are two things related to business that bother me, and I'm wondering if you've thought about it and what you would do about it. The first thing is that in the year of 2008, a new concept arose, which was un-American and really goes against the grain, which is that the government decides that some businesses are too big to fail. That's my first issue, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure.
You know, that's where the government picks businesses to bail out, even when they've been run badly or even unconscionably. And the other issue is this. Even though we vote for people like yourself, our daily life is ruled by the unelected people in the agencies who make up all of the regulations. Their rules and regulations and laws for us are easily 10 times, maybe even 50 times what the Congress might come up with. And my husband, who runs a small business, tells me that over the span of his life, he estimates that 15% of his time was spent figuring out the regulations, filling out the forms, and complying. Imagine the productivity and increasing the right to rise that could come if you would just exempt small businesses from all this stuff where they really don't know better than us how to run our business.
Great, very thoughtful. I'll answer the second question by responding to the first as well. Because the first question, this idea of too big to fail, I mean, on the surface it makes sense, but they've created regulation around banks now where we have greater accumulation of assets in the larger banks rather than less. We've created bigger systemic risk by regulation. The unintended consequences of rules across the board is what is troubling, and particularly when it's from Washington, D.C. Because, you know, I was talking to Dean today, we were talking about water issues. Our issues in Florida are that we have 60 inches of rain a year, but we don't have a place to store it. So 90% of it goes out to tide or transvaporates. A little different than your issues, where you have lots of places to store it and no water. And so a Washington imposed set of regulations is totally irrelevant if you look at the great, you know, diversity that exists. In the case of too big to fail, we've created so much complexity. I'll tell you an example. I was in Washington, Iowa, talking about Washington, D.C. Washington, Iowa must have 2,000 people. It's a tiny, great little town. And in the Q&A part of the little town hall meeting we did in the front lawn of this guy's house, a banker says, you know, Dodd-Frank's a disaster. I said, well, explain it to me. Well, we're a $120+ million asset bank. We have 5 branches. We didn't have any loan losses. We were doing great. We knew our customers and we underwrote the loans the right way. We didn't have a problem. And these laws, this new set of rules, has increased our compliance costs and legal costs from $100,000 to $600,000, 5-fold. And that $600,000 cost now, when you consider that they probably have a $10 million business, you capitalize that cost, it effectively close to wipes out their entire equity. So the community banks that were never the problem are going to be going out of business, and they're going to be replaced by non-banks that have no regulation, or by large banks that create greater consolidation and greater systemic risk. If you look at how we go about doing this, it's the same in the EPA. It's the same in the FCC. I was in Silicon Valley yesterday, or in San Francisco, and a kid at Thumbtack asked me about the FCC deal. In San Francisco, they think it's a pretty cool deal to regulate the access to the internet with a 1934 law, because I think they think that somehow all the content, all the apps will be able to get a low-cost access and it'll be great for their business. That's not how it works. Immediately after controlling the internet, the federal government will have some other, you know, crazy idea to begin to look at the content and which is good and which is bad. Every time we give up authority over our own actions, we create the unintended consequences that create problems. And so, going forward, appointing men and women that have subject matter expertise in these agencies has to be the first step. Instead of having political hacks and academics drive an ideological agenda, regulation should have an economic impact along with the social good. And having people that understand how it works has to be the first step. Secondly, there are issues that I think where the president, this particular president, has gone way beyond his authority. In working with Congress, we need to restore constitutional respect as it relates to how we regulate in Washington, D.C. Third, I think it's time to review the whole administrative procedure on how rules are created, because it takes way too long, it creates way too much uncertainty. Smaller businesses can't survive the costs of waiting all this stuff out. There is not a certainty about it. The number of people that can sue is way too broad. We should reform it so that it is clearer, more transparent, shorter, with less cost. Fourth, I believe in the 10th Amendment. I got to be governor of a state. You get to appreciate the 10th Amendment a lot more when you start seeing how power is taken away from you. And so wherever possible, we should delegate authority back to the states. EPA has a lot of the delegated authority to the states, but it's been taken away. Other agencies, the same thing. We should push power back. Education is certainly part of that. I think we ought to do the same for Medicaid and other programs, but the regulatory side has to be part of this as well. This is a place that requires total all-in commitment as an executive. You can't just pass a law or pass it, in Washington, sadly, if you just file an amendment, people get to call it success because not much happens. But when you're trying to fix these big complex things, you have to be all in to make it happen. And that's what I got to do as governor of the state. So I appreciate this question. Whether we exempt small businesses from all this or not, I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I don't know what the full consequences are of that. There are some rules that do have exemptions for small businesses. But I think we ought to maybe look at just reforming the whole system of rulemaking altogether. There's a gentleman in the back. I can't see where the microphones are.
Back here.
Here we go.
Thank you. Governor, you've talked a lot about the economy, and obviously we're an economy-driven country. Right now we have $18 trillion in debt. How do you see reducing that number or getting us at least close to a balanced budget, and how long do you think that will take, and can you do it in your term?
I think you can do it if you create a high growth. The first step is to fix how we regulate, fix the broken tax code, lower rates, eliminate as many expenditures and deductions as possible to unleash economic growth. Fix a broken immigration system and turn it into a legal system that drives economic prosperity. Embrace the energy revolution. All of those things would unleash the animal spirits into the country and would create higher growth. Revenue to government will grow when the economy grows at a far faster rate. It'll grow exponentially. If we're growing at 4% instead of this anemic 1.5% is probably the likely number this year, the revenue receipts will take off if you're growing at a sustained rate. So there's no way to get out from our structural deficits at 2%, the so-called new normal that the left talks about. Just forget about it, we're only going to grow at 2%. That'll create more dependency, more intergenerational poverty, more declining incomes for the middle class. High growth can create revenue for, more importantly for me, median income growth for the middle class, but it also creates revenue for government. So that's the first step. Secondly, we need entitlement reform. You look over the horizon and the net present value of future costs of Medicaid, Medicare, Obamacare, all the entitlements, not counting Social Security, which is a retirement system, that too has actuarial deficits, is at least $50 trillion. So we have an economy of 19 trillion, 20 trillion now. These future costs taken back to the present is so extraordinary. It's the Titanic. You can't solve it. You can't solve our structural budget problems until we have the courage to reform entitlement delivery. That means lots of things. It means probably raising the retirement age, not for those that are already receiving benefits, but for those that are in the future receiving them. There's a lot of things that we can do, but it'll be tough. But you're not going to deal with the structural deficits unless we deal with that. Then you need a president working with Congress to go through every aspect of the rest of how government works and do more with less. There is no reason, I don't know if you've had any experience with the federal government. It's extraordinarily complex and expensive. When it takes $800 million to build a website for a healthcare exchange, you got a problem. There's lots of things where the Veterans Department, another scandal of epic proportions. I was in Colorado Springs. They were talking about a hospital they're building that was budgeted for, I think, $200 million, had a cost overrun, had another one, and now they're talking about to build it out. It's $1.8 billion. million. The same Veterans Department, by the way, who had relieved people got vets off the waiting lists, didn't get care, people lost their lives, 2 people have been fired. That's the government that we have, and I believe using technology, you can shrink the beast, and that would be part of this as well. And over an extended period, I'd love to have the president get a modified version of the line item veto power, which would be, Paul Ryan has an idea in that regard, and I think we should have a balanced budget amendment as well to put pressure on this downward movement of the budget deficit. But without entitlement reform, to be completely open about this, we're on the margins dealing with things that we can have some result, but ultimately we're going to have to deal with this. And this president is, he's in the witness protection program about this. And the Democrats don't want to, they demonize people that actually admit the obvious. And you just have to have the courage of your convictions to go forward and make sure that what you propose doesn't jeopardize the benefits that people have earned already.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
I can't find where the microphones are. I'm going to give
You said that you're a Catholic and that your faith informs your life.
Yeah.
Jesus asked this question of his disciples. He asked, "Who do you say that I am?"
You're asking me? Jesus is my Savior. I hope I get a chance to visit with you so you can give me we'll have a more of an in-depth conversation about that, but that's my answer. I don't know if that was a trick question or not, to be honest. One more. Yeah.
Jeff, question. Immigration. Everybody's
Good. I'm glad you brought that up.
Everybody's jumping on. Okay, Jeff. Everybody is jumping on this bandwagon of getting rid of all the illegals that have come here.
Right.
It takes so long for paperwork to go through. I have a Vietnamese sister-in-law who took 2 years to come over here because of paperwork. Have we thought about maybe changing the paperwork to bring some of these people over here legally, and we won't have them come over the border and hurt the economy?
So I'll give you the longer answer border rather than be 40 miles off. We have technologies available to us now that would help Border Patrol agents identify people as they cross, drones, all sorts of new technologies. It was applied maybe a decade ago. It didn't look like it worked very well, the virtual fence idea, but we do now have the ability to do it. We have 40% of the illegal immigrants come to this country with a legal visa, and they stay, which you just think maybe there ought to be a way to solve that problem, and the way you do it is to have the same biometric technologies that every other country has in the developed world. And we committed to doing it, but we haven't done it, where you know when people leave and when they come. And you have to have then more enforcement agents, ICE agents, in the communities where legal visa holders are, and make sure that they depart when their visa expires. We need an e-verify system for businesses that unknowingly hire illegal immigrants. We need a guest worker program in this country based on economic need. We've had one in the past. It's been extraordinarily successful. If coming here legally is easier than coming illegally, you're going to have less illegal immigration and more legal immigration that can make a more positive contribution. We need to narrow the number of people coming by family. You may not like this answer because it may impact your sister, but I think we should get to what every other country has. Spouse and minor children, which is the definition of family all across the world as it relates to immigration. But we have spouse, minor children, adult siblings, and adult parents. And that broad definition crowds out economic immigrants. We narrowed that to what every other country has. Eliminate the quotas by country because that was put on top of this system. We could have 500,000 first-round draft picks that deal with create economic opportunity for all of us. And then finally, the part that Republicans struggle with is what do you do with 11 million people that are already here? And here's my thought. Self-deportation is not a plan. It's a sentiment. It's this feeling of that the rule of law is not applying and people are angry about that. I respect that. just deporting everybody is not a practical thing if you're a conservative, because it would cost hundreds of billions of dollars based on studies, take 10 years. How about allowing people to have a provisional work permit where they work, where they pay taxes, where they might pay a fine, where they learn English, where they don't receive federal government support, where they earn legal status, where they don't cut in the front of the line, where they receive what they want, the great majority, legal status, but we don't jeopardize our legal system by allowing people who have been patiently waiting outside, making it harder for them to come in. That, I think, is a plan that would work. And by the way, if Republicans want to win the presidency, we better stop having our angrier voices be the ones that people hear. The angry voices are reflecting, as I said, they're preying on people's legitimate concerns. But there are a whole lot of people that listen to this stuff. And what they hear is a conservative saying, hey, I want your vote, but you can't be on my team. And I know for a fact, because I got more Latino votes in my re-election campaign than I got what we call in Florida Anglo votes. I got 60% of the Latino vote. And I was the most conservative, reform-minded governor in Florida's history. That's what people call me. That's what the liberals call me. And so you can do this the right way. Be true to who you are. Embrace people that want to be conservatives. Win elections and fix these things. That's what we need to start doing. How long have we been talking about immigration? I mean, it sounds like this is like Groundhog's Day. Over and over and over again. Why don't we just control the border, reform our laws, make it work, and move to the next thing? That's what we ought to be doing. Anyway, thank you.
Dear sponsors, first is the Silver Speech Charter School. Thank you for letting us have this facility today. Thank you to all of you for being here. It's a beautiful Friday morning in Northern Nevada. You chose to be here. Good on you. Thank you for coming. And finally, to Governor Bush for spending the time with us today. I thought he did a tremendous job. I hope you did too. Let's give him one more round of applause and say thank you for being with us and being with us today. Have a great weekend.
Yeah. Take it down. You got something to say? Anybody got something to say?
Yeah, you spent a lot of time talking about what is wrong with the Iran deal. What would you do? I mean, can you succinctly say what you would do to counteract that?
What I would have done or what I will do?
Both.
What I would have done was not to negotiate with Iran unless it was to have a steadfast commitment that they would not have the capability to build a nuclear bomb. And that's not what happened. The exact opposite happens. We've opened up the doors with sanctions and allowing for conventional weapons to be allowed into the country. Their ballistic missile capability will be enhanced. They continue to repress their own people. There are 4 Americans held hostage in Iran. They destabilized the region, and we got nothing in return.
And you would do?
And as president, I think we need to reestablish our relationships in the region so people know we're serious, that we will maintain our alliances, we'll support our friends. We need to isolate Iran politically and look at where the agreement stands a year and a half from now. A lot could happen. The Congress could vote against this. There may be more evidence that it's not as verifiable as it might appear on paper. But begin the process to, in consultation with our allies, deal with Iran with the conditions that will exist in January 2017.
Governor, but can I just follow up on that? I mean, your position seems to be you wouldn't have talked to Iran in the first place, but you say it's a terrible deal. You say you haven't read the agreement, and then you said if
well, I've read enough the same sources that everybody else has.
But then you said if you became president, you're not going to say what some of your competitors have, that you're immediately going to get rid of the agreement.
Not.
Why?
No, because on 12/01 on January, whatever it is, 19th, I will not probably had a confirmed Secretary of State, unlikely. Won't have a national security team in place. I would not have consulted with our allies. I would not have had the intelligence briefings to make a decision. If you're running for president, I think it's important to be mature and thoughtful about this. I'm deeply worried about this agreement because I think it's going to create the possibility of nuclear proliferation in the region and a much more unstable Middle East that will impact us.
Governor, last night Donald Trump said that the fact that,
Oh my God.
that you and your allies have raised $100 million, it means that you're doing favors for your donors, and I'm just wondering if you have a response to that.
No.
Governor, do you have a response? In the latest USA Suffolk University poll, Trump is ahead 17% to 14%. And he also...
Inside the margin of error, man.
Okay.
We got a long way to go. This is the old cliche, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's actually quite accurate. We have a plan. I'm working hard. I'm taking my case directly to people. I'm answering questions. We have a good strategy, and I'm pretty confident I'm going to win.
Governor, what about the possibility of Governor Sandoval of Nevada becoming your running mate if you do receive the nomination?
I'm a big fan of his. He has been a great governor. We're friends. That's way off into the future. We got a long way to go before I start thinking about that.
I'd like to turn a little bit focus more into Nevada public lands.
Yeah.
You know, the president
This
signed
week.
that, this week did the Basin and Range monument. Do you think, do you support that? Do you think that's a good use of federal authority?
No, I don't. I mean, particularly in a state that has so little control over its own land based on history. I don't think narrowing uses of public lands is appropriate. There are ways that you can build consensus to protect the natural environment and allow people to access their land. This is our land. And every time you do this, you make it actually create probably the possibility of conservation degradation. Having uses on land actually can create win-wins. And so this is, I've talked to a lot of people in the West about the federal government overreach, and I think there should be real caution about expanding it for sure.
On the flip side of that, we have, ranchers like Clive and Bundy. Do you have an opinion on Clive and Bundy and what the federal government should do to try to bring him into compliance with?
Look,
well, he's
I think
breaking
we
the
need
law.
he is breaking the law, and I think the law ought to be enforced. I'll let the federal government authorities figure out how to do that.
Will you be more successful in getting through the gridlock in Washington?
I think so. It's a low bar.
Governor,
to be honest with you, that's like, well, it's like saying, can you walk from here to there? Yeah, I think I might be able to make it.
Governor, you
Unless
mentioned
tackle me.
Governor, you mentioned immigration, and you give a very long and thoughtful, deliberate steps that you would take.
Thank you,
but
John.
you stopped short. You said they should have legal status if they do certain.
That's my consistent view.
What about a path to citizenship? Should they be allowed to become citizens?
I think a path to legal status, given the environment we're in now, given the need to build consensus on how we craft an immigration policy that allows us to grow, is the right one.
Does that include citizenship or not?
No, legal
No.
status, legalized status.
Okay.
I say to be fluent in Spanish. Do you have any words for our Spanish speakers?
¿Qué es la pregunta?
Con Univision Nevada. Just
Sí.
your Latino voters and how you plan to.
Bueno, yo voy a venir a Nevada lo más con frecuencia para hacer campaña en inglés y español. Hoy día ayer mi esposa estaba haciendo campaña con mujeres de negocio latinas en Las Vegas. Tenemos una campaña donde queremos abrazar a todos con el mismo mensaje. No cambiamos el mensaje en español y inglés. Y así debe ser.
And then when you were talking about guns and members of the military, were you saying just in recruiting offices, or were you talking about military bases?
I think I would say both, but I think it ought to be reviewed. It's a congressional law. It requires a change in law. So I think Congress should consider reviewing this. It seems to me that if you have military bases or recruiting offices, these are symbols of American might. They're targets. This is how you garner attention. You go to places where there's vulnerability, and it's a very powerful symbolic attack on our country. And Marines lost their lives. And we should be saddened by it, but also resolved, I think, to create better security apparatus around our own country, focus on how we deal with the rest of the world in a more aggressive way, but also recognize that military bases, if the Marines were we're armed, it wouldn't. I think people would have known that, and had they known it, they may not have come in. Who knows? I just think it ought to be reviewed for sure.
Governor, do you think you or Marco Rubio is better positioned to win over these donors in Florida?
It's a big state. I'm sure that Marco will get support. I don't view it as a zero-sum game. We're going to work hard to have a well-funded campaign. Proud of the support I've gotten to date. Money alone, though, doesn't matter. You got to go campaign hard, and that's what I'm doing. I'm doing it with joy in my heart, doing it as a happy warrior, and I'm doing it to win. Thanks, guys.
Governor, Governor,
I've talked to my mom, not my dad. I'm going to call my dad, though, because I read in the paper that he actually is taking calls. I was surprised. So.
hey, Governor, on your vouchers, would you push for that on a national?
I think the federal government ought to allow states that have ESA programs or voucher programs or corporate tax scholarship programs or McKay scholarship programs for kids with learning disabilities. If they have programs that they want to expand, they ought to be given that leeway through the existing funding streams that exist. It's similar to what the House version has, but I think it should be expanded to private options as well.
Governor, do you have an opinion on the BLM request for Burning Man? For what?
Burning Man?
No idea.
That was a joke, thank you.
No, it wasn't a joke.